Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to talk about the movie Brothers. So, this is a Tobey Maguire, Jake Gyllenhaal, Natalie Portman film, ultimately because most of the movie focuses around these three people, and then has other family members that otherwise throw a wrench into the feelings of certain people, or otherwise throw a wrench into really a very damaged individual at some point in this movie. Really, this movie is heartbreaking and or tender at some points because there are two different stories going on throughout this entire movie. We ultimately have Sam, who is played by Tobey Maguire, who eventually is just a Marine on his way to be deployed or otherwise going back into duty, and that duty ends up taking him on a whirlwind that ultimately brings him eventually to a very dark place. We ultimately also have Jake Gyllenhaal's character, who seems to be a man who, when we start out in the very beginning of this film, it seems like this is a guy down on his luck, and ultimately, after that being a time where this man is down on his luck, eventually it seems like he has a goal for something. It seems like he can aspire to be something, and it seems like he can brush himself off and pick himself back up again and hope to otherwise feel like he can live again. We also have Natalie Portman's character that is kind of going through all kinds of ranges of emotions throughout this movie, just kind of really a very interesting actor out of probably all three of these, just because, like, good God, like, how many different kinds of things does she have to pull off within this film, and also be a mother as well. So, going into this, I would say that this movie kind of deals with I would probably say, more of the past, or more of the uh, kind of the inability of letting things go, and so they just keep stewing and keep stewing away until ultimately somebody just explodes. Somebody just tries to avoid things, or otherwise people just try to just get to the point of, like, how did this get so far, kind of thing. How did this get to a point where I can't talk to this person? How did it get to this point to where this person seems to either be shutting me out, or seems to be this person is like needing to be rebooted, reloaded, or just like trying, like, has kind of completely forgotten about his past at some point, or maybe at some point there are some characters in this movie that are too far into reliving their past that they lash out on other people. So I know that's a lot to oops, almost dropped my phone. I know that's a lot to cryptically or very non spoiler like dish out. This movie is just kind of like waiting, knowing full well that you know that Tobey Maguire is ultimately going to be where he is towards the end of the movie, and you're just waiting for that moment. It's kind of like the Ryan Reynolds movie Buried to me. It's like you have Ryan, who is buried into this grave, and you're just thinking, like, is he going to make it out of this? Is he going to die? Is he going to be able to have some kind of, towards the end of this, like, being able to have at least a moment with his wife or not within that film? And the main reason why I enjoyed that movie is because there's so many little heartbreaking moments that go into Buried, and ultimately at some point I need to re-review that or review that because I've never have, because ultimately I'm assuming people won't enjoy it just because of how dark a lot of the movie is. Not figuratively, literally, the movie is like you can't really see much through a bulk of the film, so people might not enjoy it, but I did. But anyways, so now going into this movie, Brothers. So there are, like, really, I would call this like a family film. Not a movie that should be seen by a family, but it has something to do with a family. Of course, with it just being about, like, it's not just a movie about brothers, it's more about an entire family that is kind of dealing with something throughout this film. And everybody at some point is either like trying not to get heavily emotional about things, and they do, or like are just trying to grieve and move on. So that's all I can say about this movie in a very cryptic like sense. I really enjoy every single person's journey in this movie, even if it's something as simple as Hank's character, who is Sam and Tommy's father. Like, I enjoy that journey of even that character throughout this film. And there are some fun moments out of, or there is some funny or fun moments out of this movie. Not every single minute of it is just like this heart wrenching, like, ugh, kind of tale where you're just like, man, this is so like devastating to watch. No, at some points there is some levity in this movie as well. So let's go into that double five to otherwise break this down a little bit more in spoiler terms. Ultimately, I can't really say much about the story because reasonably, this story is a very simple story to tell. So, reasonably, if I were to go any deeper into the story, like basically, I wouldn't have much to really go into for spoilers. So, that's why I'm doing and talking about this the way it is. I enjoy this movie. I enjoy the characters and uh, like I wouldn't say that this would be like oh man I have to really see this one again soon and whatever, but like every once in a while I'll just like randomly just like hey how about I just pop this one in, and like more than likely it might be this one at some point. But I don't know, I remember vaguely seeing this before, so I think I wanted to go in to watch this one more time and ultimately finally say it's like oh yeah I actually remember this film. So let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time I'm going to spoil this movie. So we have it to where, seemingly in the very beginning of this movie, everything is seemingly going well for Tobey Maguire. He's a Marine, and ultimately he has a wife who is Grace and two daughters that ultimately love him. And ultimately Maggie and Isabel that both love him. And so reasonably we have it to where Sam's character Toby is living the high life, and it seems like everything is going right for him, and like everything is going well. Being a Marine, it seems that uh, we have it to where again Sam is soon going to be deployed, and Grace is ultimately just like, well, how about I go with you? Like, how about like, how about you? How about I go and you stay home, and you watch the kids? And Sam is just like, yeah, that would be nice now, wouldn't it? Um, we have such these tender moments where Sam is consistently asking for the girls to hug him, or for like all the girls to just kind of share a bed with him at some point in this movie. And all these moments are really tender and really sweet, and sometimes they end up getting ruined by reasonably people that are just like, yeah, I'm not quite tired, but it's just the fact that like Toby or Sam is just like I just wanted to be home. I just wanted to be home. So we have to where everything is going right for Sam, and ultimately he ends up realizing that his brother is being able to be released out of prison, so he goes and picks his brother up. So Tommy, who is Jake Gyllenhaal, has gone from prison. It seems like he is happy to be released to the point where he doesn't want to go back there. Even though at some points it seems like he is at some point going to be close to be destructive by drinking alcohol that he doesn't have money for, and reasonably, it seems like Tommy doesn't really like. I question like it seems like Tommy might be doing some odd jobs of sorts, or maybe doing some kind of construction at within this, or maybe that's what he ended up quasi doing some construction jobs in prison, because that could be a possibility. Uh, we have we have Jake, who in this movie is a a character that is getting back from prison, and Sam, of course, picks him up, hugs him, and ultimately we have Tommy, who is just trying to scrape his life back together, but ultimately is very like he's afraid of being able to go back to his past. You ultimately have Sam, who's ultimately asking him, it's like, hey, are you gonna go to the bank and apologize to that woman? And Tommy's like, no, like I don't do that. Ultimately, Sam gives Tommy some money to go and get some food, and ultimately, like, also tells him, "Hey, don't go and rob the place." So, like, Sam is kind of like bejokingly like trying to make a joke with Tommy, but so reasonably we have Tommy at some points borrowing Grace and Sam's car, and like yeah, like reasonably Tommy is trying to just go like, okay, I don't want to end up back up in prison again. I just want to be able to hopefully be able to put back the pieces of my life together. But the only problem is Tommy and Sam's father. We find out that after Sam gets deployed and ultimately has his helicopter being shot down, ultimately for him to have him, the captain, and his private, ultimately being taken into seclusion and ultimately being held at gunpoint, and ultimately just seemingly in stuck in an underground cave where at some point they try to escape, but that becomes a moot point. So we ultimately get the news that supposedly Grace hears that Sam is missing in action. There, he's assumed dead, and ultimately we have Grace, who had lost, of course, her husband, and so ultimately the first person seemingly that she eventually tells, because ultimately it sounds like Grace had probably tried to call a bunch of people and told a bunch of people, but it seems like the only person we really get to see on screen get to know this news is Tommy. Tommy brings back the car to Grace and ultimately says, yeah, I know that Sam told me that I could borrow the car, so I'm borrowing it. It seems like Tommy and Grace like just really aren't like for some reason like Grace really does not like him, and I guess it's probably because he went to prison, but like Grace just doesn't like him. Maybe she just feels uncomfortable around him. And so Tommy is just like, good God, it's like, what do I need to do to just like I've been nice to you, I've been whatever, like what do you want? What do you want from me? Because ultimately, like, he's giving her the keys back to the car, and ultimately he's gonna like walk back home. And so Grace is like, "Oh no, it's not that. It's not the car. It's like I just heard that Sam is dead." And so Tommy goes into the mode of like, "Well, hey, like, how is it I'm just hearing this now? Like, why haven't you called me?" And they like, we've tried to call you, and we couldn't give you, like, we couldn't get to you, we couldn't get you, then we couldn't give you and let you know that your brother is dead. Because ultimately, they had military Esh-like guys come to tell Natalie Grace's character, and so yeah, like after she heard the news, she had to break it down to other people and let them all know. But Tommy, I guess, was the last to know. So we have it to where we are to assume Sam is dead, but he's not. He's just kind of really held hostage within this group of people, let's just say, and ultimately leading him to be tortured. Probably, maybe not having the ability to eat anything, probably getting beaten up a lot, and this and that. To eventually, we have it to where it seems that the enemies had gotten the wallets of these people, and ultimately the private is talking to the captain, is like, "Hey, what do we do?" Blah 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 blah, and so reasonably. It seems we see pictures off to the distance, and ultimately the captain is mentioning like, "Hey, like, is that like pictures of your wife, pictures of your kid?" And the private's like, "Yeah, yes it is." It's like, "Well, you don't know those people. The only person that you know is me. The only friend that you have in the world is me right now. And don't tell them anything. Do not give them one bit of information that they could use against you." And so reasonably they are trying as much as humanly possible to, like, hey, like, we're gonna try as long as possible to stall out these people from making us do anything until we forcibly have to, unless our life is absolutely on the line. And then there is no there is no breaking point after that. There is no, like, there has to be at some point, just like, these people are just going to keep going after these people until they give up information, or until they just decide to finally just go, "Okay, well, we'll just kill these people. These guys are wasting our time." So while that is going on, the horrific notion of that, we have it to where uh, Tommy and Grace are ultimately just having fun with the kids. There are at points when they are going ice skating together, and I know that I think they use the exact same clothes in the earlier scene as to the later scene. So maybe they just like kind of used like both there's two ice skating scenes that I'm sure they probably uh, did on the same day, and then just made it seem like separate, because why not? That would be a better ease of money at some point. So we ultimately have Jake really realizing how small Grace's kitchen is. And so ultimately he decides upon himself, with bringing in a couple friends of his, to remodel Grace's kitchen, doing something nice for her, because ultimately he's like, "Okay, I want to make up for not only borrowing her car, but like I just want to like I just want to do something good for her, because ultimately, like, my brother isn't here to be able to do this." So we ultimately have these fun moments where all these people are chipping in, or all these people are chipping in to put up this kitchen, because really, when we have supposedly Sam's funeral, and we ultimately have it to where seemingly everybody's going and heavily having hard times grieving, you ultimately find out that Tommy is trying to prevent Hank from driving because it seems like Hank doesn't really seem all that there, or maybe he's a little bit drunk because reasonably he probably got loaded before this funeral maybe. So you have Tommy that is really just talking to his father and trying to get the keys away from him, and Hank wants nothing of it and is ultimately just like, God, like, why can't you be more like your brother? Like, why can't you uh why can't you be better? Why can't you be this? Why can't you be like Hank is just consistently throwing Tommy just under the bus consistently, just like, God, why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be this perfect soldier or whatever? Like, why can't you like be more like him and dot 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 dot, to the point to where even Tommy's like, you know what? If I would have easily given my life to have Sam here, like, because reasonably, uh that is his father's golden boy, because ultimately he turned out to be just like him. uh Sam ended up being just like his father and joined the Marines just like he did. And so we ultimately have Tommy just like, God, my father is so difficult to talk to, and so just like, God, he's such a stuck in the mud. Because really, we have Hank also dealing with being from Vietnam and being in the Vietnam War, and then ultimately he realizes later that he took all that post traumatic stress and took it out on probably his kids, forcing them to want to become in the military, or just kind of really kind of treating them like Marines, just because uh, that's what he knew. And so reasonably, uh, pushing them to be better people probably pushed Tommy into being a worse person, um, and this and that. So we had to where Tommy is now like, he's coming into Grace's home, like saying, "Hey, like, I got some molding that I can put into your kitchen," like really making this kitchen really look nice. And we have Frank eventually coming in to the home, where ultimately the kids were trying to make pancakes for their mom, um, but ultimately she woke up too early. Really, we have it to where Frank at some point is before, like, earlier on in this movie, like Frank is when they're making pancakes for Grace. Ultimately, the kitchen isn't done yet, and so Frank ultimately is like, God, this kitchen is horrible. To where ultimately then Jake realizes, or Tommy realizes, that he needs to remodel the kitchen, in which they do. And so then Hank ends up coming back after Tommy's putting in all the molding, and he's like, God, how did you learn all of the all of this, like, all of this work? How did you do all this construction? How did you like figure out how to do all this? I'm assuming probably prison probably did that for him, or probably he just, like, he had a lot of friends that ultimately were in construction, and he just kind of like got back with them, and ultimately they were offering him construction jobs, which was probably really nice of them, if that's ultimately probably what he had done. But so reasonably, Jake eventually goes into the bar, which ultimately he probably should not have done, but he does anyways, because I think he's just feeling sorry about Sam, and also reasonably, it seems like more and more Tommy is also hiding his seemingly almost affection for Grace. It seems that more and more Tommy wants to at some point be with Grace. It seems like there is some time where Tommy is playing with the kids and he can feel like he could slip right in and be Grace's husband and Isabel and Maggie's father, but really he's also just like God. I also feel like like crap because I feel like I'm stealing everything from my brother, who is, yeah, he's dead, but still, like I feel like I'm stealing everything from him. So that's probably the moments of which maybe quite possibly Tommy is pushed to drink, and then ultimately we have it to where Tommy is giving a phone call to Grace, ultimately mentioning, "Hey, yeah, I must have drank the most expensive drinks in the world because ultimately I didn't have enough money for these drinks, which were like $45 or something like that. And so ultimately, if I were to try to walk out of this bar, ultimately I would get popped in my and I would go right back to jail because of me being on parole. So Grace has to go out there and give up for $45 for Tommy's tab to ultimately have him kind of sleep on the couch, and recently the girls are just kind of like baffled and or like they're kind of like, what's going on, like why is he like sleeping over on the couch, like this is weird. But it seems like more and more they're possibly thinking that Tommy is going to be their father because ultimately he's sleeping on the couch. But so anyways, pushing on more extensive time where this family is having fun together, and so reasonably we have it to where it gets to the point to where ultimately Grace and Tommy are smoking weed, and reasonably Tommy is just like, well, like why did you hate me so much? And Grace is like, you know what, I didn't really hate you, it was just the fact that like you were never like she tries to justify it, but there's never a really good reason for why they didn't like get to be a couple, or otherwise like there wasn't a good enough reason. But really we also know that Sam was the quarterback of this of their high school team, and ultimately Grace was a cheerleader, so it was kind of a very cliche, like, well, the jock had to marry the cheerleader, so it was kind of cliche to ultimately just be like, well, the reason why that Grace ended up with Sam is just because it was like supposed to be that way. It wasn't supposed to be that Grace was supposed to be ending up with Tommy. And so reasonably eventually after this smoking of weed, we accidentally have Tommy and Grace kiss. And that's all it ends up being, just a kiss, and then ultimately they realize how much a mistake that they had done, and ultimately Tommy and Grace ultimately just kind of separate and just kind of leave, and they're ultimately just like, yeah, this was a bad decision. So we have it to where it seems like Jake or Tommy is still hanging out with the kids, having fun and whatever. And here's where Grace gets a phone call from the military saying, "Oh, hey, yeah, you know your husband that we told you was dead. Actually, he's not. Because here's what happens. We have Sam, who ultimately is like being tortured for information, tortured to the point to where his private gives up all information to the point where there's only so much torture this guy could take, and Sam is consistently telling him, tell them nothing, like don't say a word, don't even speak to me right now, this and that, like do not give them anything, to the point where his voice is like cracking and stuff. You wonder how many times he had to probably shout in this film. So but this private eventually breaks. He does whatever video that they want him to do, and he ultimately like mutters about his wife and his kid in the video. And so seemingly this guy like gives up all the information he can, and the captain says nothing, to the point where they even torture the captain. The captain gives up nothing, which is Sam's character, and to the point where eventually the enemy that ultimately is keeping them hostage ultimately is like, you know what, we didn't get anything out of your private. We didn't get anything out of him. Uh, we want you now to kill your private. We want you to kill uh, your your soldier. And so they are basically telling Sam that he has to kill his own soldier, his own guy working under him, because this private is worthless to them, and the only person that they need is ultimately the Sam. And so ultimately they're just telling him, it's like, hey, like, if you do not kill him, we will kill you. And they throw a pipe to Sam, and ultimately they keep threatening him over and over that shoot him, or kill him with the pipe, or I'm going to kill you. Sam throws the pipe down. They tell him to pick it back up. So ultimately, we just have it to where Sam just loses his stuff, and he just ends up wailing on this private over and over and over. And then he's like, "Fine, like, is that what you want? Is that what you wanted?" So reasonably pushing on later to where eventually, like, Sam is still giving them nothing, but eventually it seems that there is some other team that eventually finds this group and then finds Sam, and ultimately, like, is trying to get him back from outer space to be back on Earth, kind of like ultimately saying like, uh, Cahill, that's your name, right? Like, Captain. It's like hello, like trying to get him from seemingly where he had completely lost his mind, to try to get him back to Earth, let's just say. So Grace gets the call, and so we have Sam's character eventually come back home, but he comes back different. Uh, he comes back and really is very much like he's hugging the family, and ultimately, but he just looks different. He just seems different to all of his family, to the point where it seems like Isabel is really taking very hard that uh, Sam isn't Tommy. Sam isn't as nice as Tommy. Sam isn't as warm as Tommy. And so eventually we just have it more and more where Isabel is just tearing up a lot because her father didn't come back the way he was before. And so really that's what is pushing Isabel to want Tommy and get rid of Sam, even though Sam is actually her father. It's just the fact that like she likes Sam more. And so we have to where like Sam is even forgetting about some of the stuff that he had told his daughters. He's telling them some joke that they heard 1,000 times before, and he's like, "Oh, I told you that joke. Oh, I guess I did." So we have it to where it seems that Sam's memory from his past is, for the most point, gone at some points, and it seems like sometimes people have to uh, trigger his memory, or otherwise there's a lot of times when ultimately like sitting at the dinner table, like his daughters will tell him some joke and he just won't quite get it. He's like, okay, why is a an elephant, what is this elephant joke? I don't quite understand it. It's like, well, elephant's ears are really big, and he's just like, he can't figure out the joke, and ultimately he leaves because he leaves the table because he can't figure out the joke. So we have it to where we have it to where the family's going ice skating. Even Tommy is going along, and so we have it to where Sam is kind of uncomfortable with Tommy being with his family, and so Sam is kind of asking Tommy. It's like, "Hey, did you sleep with my wife?" It's like, I don't know. It seems like whenever you and Grace are together, Tommy, it's like you're like uh, high school sweethearts all over again. It's like what is going on? Would you tell me if ultimately like you did anything with my wife? Tommy just continues to smoke cigarettes and like kind of touching Sam on the neck, but ultimately Tommy says nothing. Tommy doesn't tell him jack. So pushing the escalation to where we have we have Maggie who is having her birthday party and everything is going all great, and seemingly everything is going all great. It seems like Sam is uh, like at some points it seems like he is a little bit of aggressive at some points, but like I think he's maybe starting to even out a little bit. He is also desperate to want to get deployed again with the Marines, and he's ultimately asking his other Marine if ultimately he can go back to being in duty because ultimately his family doesn't quite understand what is wrong with him, or they don't really quite understand him, and so ultimately he just wants to go and just be in the Marines again. Uh, he just wants to just go out and do his job again. Ultimately, the Marine is telling him it's like, hey, you've been through a lot. Like, if anything, you just need time to you need time to settle. You need time to work through all that. And ultimately, supposedly, Sam had gone through some treatment, some therapy, and stuff like that. So that's good. And so reasonably, we have it to where we are at Maggie's birthday party. It seems like Isabel is ultimately just kind of bitter about Maggie's toys and bitter about how uh, bitter about her father not being what she wanted him to be, and really eventually Isabel just lashes out and just explodes to the point of just being irritating at this party because ultimately Isabel is hating on the fact that Tommy has a new girlfriend, and ultimately we're just trying to like everybody's trying to move on or work through some of this stuff, and so Isabel is just like throwing a fit. Ultimately mentioning to Sam, Isabel is mentioning to Sam that ultimately, like, yeah, like, Tommy and Mommy have been sleeping together numerous times. All just sleeping together all the time. And this and that, trying anything to just amp up Sam, and because Sam like steals the balloon from Isabel and is like, "Stop it!" Like he's ultimately consistently like telling her like, "Stop doing what you're doing." It's like, and she just keeps on going to see what eventually Sam will do. And so recently, that's where Isabel hits Sam with, "Oh yeah, like they've been kissing and sleeping together, all kinds of things. Like, what are you gonna do?" kind of thing. So we have it to where Sam is almost creating a little bit of distance from Grace, and Sam just starts like putting up cups and is just trying to just like he's trying to do some busy work, just try like he has nothing better to do but just to be at his home, so he's just kind of rearranging cups and is ultimately just trying to figure out like something that he can keep his mind on instead of like cheating and stuff like that. Even though at some point Sam like tells Tommy or tells Grace that is like, I think you've been like cheating on me. I think you've been sleeping around on me and you haven't been telling me, and ultimately leading him to want to leave the home for seemingly until the sun came up and just drive and just kind of get out of the house. To where when he comes back, that's when he starts placing cups all around the house because he has nothing better to do. But we have it to where when Grace is ultimately having Sam, like talking out with Sam, bizarrely we have Sam who is bizarrely like paranoid, and ultimately he's holding a gun around his house because he heard a noise, so he's just very paranoid right now. And so reasonably we have it to where Sam is putting up these cups, and Grace is ultimately like, she's ultimately breaking down to him. It's like, me and Tommy never really did anything. All we did was kiss, and that's it. And so that is when Sam just loses it. And Sam ultimately just breaks everything in the kitchen and is just like, he is breaking all kinds of stuff. And he's like, do you know what I had to do to come back to you? Do you know what I did? Like, he is losing his stuff to the point to where Grace is calling Tommy, and Tommy is coming over, and Tommy is trying to calm Sam down as best he can, to the point to where ultimately Tommy uh, is trying to talk to Sam, but Sam just is not hearing it, or is not really like believing that Grace and Tommy haven't slept together. He can't believe it. And so reasonably eventually we have it to where Tommy is pulling a gun, or to where Sam is pulling a gun on Tommy, to where ultimately Grace is ultimately having his daughters lock doors and stuff like that. And so Sam ultimately doesn't want to shoot Tommy, but it's just like, God, like Sam is just so like upset at Tommy for wanting to steal every piece of his life, to the escalation of pulling a gun on him and grabbing him. And but then eventually we have it to where even the cops are called, because when Tommy gets the call about Sam, ultimately his parents were saying like, you should probably call the cops, and Tommy's like, no, not on my brother, like I'm not going to do that. And so like Tommy just says, I'm going to talk to him, that's what I'm going to do. And so when Sam ends up hearing the sirens of the police, he goes out to confront them because he's like, "Hey, what problem are we having here? What is the problem?" And ultimately, we have it to where Tommy is quasi like holding the gun around and just kind of like winging the gun around. And ultimately, we have the police officers going, "Hey, like drop the gun." Like this and that, and Tommy is just like, no, or Sam, I'm getting names confused now. Sam is just like, no, like, there's no problem here. Go away. So we ultimately have Tommy and Grace trying as much as possible to calm him down. And it eventually just gets to the point where Sam eventually like gives up his gun and ultimately like drops to have the police arrest him. we have it to where Tommy is telling Sam that he loves him and everything like that. That he doesn't want him to. He doesn't want him to get hurt and this and that. And Sam is telling Tommy that he's drowning. That he's drowning. Ultimately leading us up to a story from previous where ultimately we had Tommy who is mentioning to Isabel that ultimately Sam had saved him in a river once before. And so now Tommy is going to try to go out of his way to save his brother and tell him that he loves him. And Sam is just like, like shoot me, like kill me, like do something with me. It's take me to prison if that's what you need me to do. But so Sam eventually is going into seemingly, I would assume, a mental hospital where Grace is coming to see him and is desperately asking him, it's like, you need to tell me what happened to you there. You need to tell me what happened, or I will never come back here. I will never see you again. Like, you need to tell me now. And because we ultimately had Cassie, who ultimately comes to Grace and Sam's place to ultimately talk about the private that had been killed. And Sam mentions to Cassie that he didn't see how her husband died. He didn't hear much. He didn't see much. He doesn't remember much. So he probably just buried everything. And eventually when people start like pushing or poking and whatever, like the more that Sam is like going to eventually just explode. Even to where at one point in this movie we had Hank going to Sam, and Sam was trying to fix something with his car, and Hank was like, "Well, how about you just bring that to a repair shop? Just have go to a repair shop. He's fixing his like bumper or something." And Sam's like, "I have the time. Like I might as well try and fix it." And so Hank, his father, was telling Sam, it's like, "Hey, like, you know what? To be brutally honest, like, I had a lot of trouble dealing with Nam, and so hey, like, if you want to talk, like let's talk about like about what you did over there." And but still, like, Sam is just so like bottling everything up to where the point of where Grace, who ultimately loves him, is telling him, it's like, you need to tell me. You need to tell me now. Like, you need to tell me what happened to you. You need to tell me. And so that's when Sam finally says that he ended up having to forcibly kill his own private. And like that is the only thing that he really needed to say, was that he killed his own friend that he had there. He had to kill him and was forced to. And that is like the last portion of this movie, which is like, okay, like we are just to assume that after this point now that uh, Sam eventually gets to the point of at ease or being okay. And so that's where we can have this seemingly be a more kind of silver lining like ending, or have it be just like um that Sam like isn't too far from uh isn't too far gone, is kind of the moral of the story. That Sam could come back from this, and hopefully he can become who he was in the very beginning of this movie before he ended up getting deployed. So that's the thing that I enjoyed about this movie was, yeah, we had Sam who eventually does explode, and eventually like gets to the point of him just like being paranoid and being like untrusting of everybody, to the point the only thing that he thinks that he can trust is the Marines, and the Marines are telling him like, hey man, just go home and just just like, you need time, you need some time to settle. And so reasonably, because Sam's mind is not correct. It's not quite right. It's just kind of like everything is completely lost in some kind of shuffle, or some kind of just, to the point where I guess he has to recall things. So when Sam finally snaps to the point of really having to talk and having to tell the truth, that's when we think that ultimately uh, he can ultimately be that person again that we saw in the very beginning of this film. So that's all I wanted to say about this movie. Just kind of talking about some scenes that I thought were fascinating. Some stuff where it's like, yeah, like anybody, like when put through any number of things, and it doesn't have to be military, it could just be anything. Like some people have to work through stuff and talk about it, and I guess eventually at some points, like I try to do that, and then I try not to go back to it, just because it, like going back over it, it just it's just like, might as well just like have a old scab of sorts that you're just kind of like peeling off, and it freaking hurts. So really, when going into this movie, I would say like hopefully everybody like gets their therapeutic moment where they just kind of like get something off their chest. And at some points I feel like I myself have gone through those notions of eventually just kind of getting some things off of my chest, which ultimately led to um, me ultimately just kind of feeling a little bit better about some things, and kind of working past them and working through them, and ultimately just uh, being at a better quasi like place. So anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye everybody. Goodbye everybody.